The wedding hall shimmered under the glow of hundreds of tiny lights, the kind that made the whole place feel like something out of a movie. Guests in elegant suits and dresses mingled, raising glasses of champagne, laughing, and posing for photos under the chandeliers. In the middle of it all, a 38-year-old single dad named Mark stood beside his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. She wore a little white dress, clutching her favorite teddy bear with one hand and her father's hand with the other. It was supposed to be a night of joy, a rare evening where Mark could relax and let his daughter feel like a part of something bigger than just the two of them. Mark had always been careful with Emma, never letting her out of sight. Being a single father had taught him to balance both roles, protector and provider. Tonight, though, surrounded by familiar faces and the joyful music of a live band, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. He introduced Emma to friends and colleagues who complimented her smile and the way she looked like a little princess. She giggled shyly, hiding half behind him, but every so often she would peek out curiously at the crowd, fascinated by the excitement in the room. But weddings were overwhelming for a child. The laughter grew louder, the music faster, and soon Emma tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering that she wanted to look around. Mark smiled, promising he would stay close, but when he turned back from a brief conversation with an old friend, his heart dropped. Emma was gone. At first, he thought she might have gone to the dessert table or spotted someone she knew. He scanned the hall quickly, expecting her tiny figure to appear between the rows of tables. But minutes passed, and the little white dress and teddy bear were nowhere to be seen. Panic set in fast. His chest tightened as he called out her name, his voice louder than he realized. "Emma!" he shouted, turning heads from nearby guests. The band continued playing, but now people began to sense something was wrong. A few stepped aside, giving him space as he hurried between tables, checking under chairs, asking anyone nearby if they had seen his daughter. Some shook their heads sympathetically, others looked confused. No one had noticed her leave. For Mark, the walls felt like they were closing in. His little girl, his whole world, had vanished into the sea of strangers. Sweat formed on his brow as he rushed to the exit of the hall, praying she hadn't gone outside into the busy city streets. Every scenario flashed through his mind, each one worse than the last. His breath quickened, hands trembling as he pulled aside a maitre d' and asked if they'd seen a child pass by. The staff member shook his head, promising to alert security. That only made Mark's panic deepen. If the staff didn't see her, where could she have gone? He had raised Emma alone since she was a baby, and the thought of losing her, even for a moment, was unbearable. Meanwhile, Emma's small footsteps had carried her into the quieter part of the hotel. She clutched her teddy tighter as the distant music grew muffled behind her. The hallways stretched out long and dim, lit by soft yellow bulbs. She wasn't scared yet, only curious, but soon the shadows and silence made her uneasy. She stopped in the middle of the corridor, unsure where to go next, her little face scrunching with worry. It was then that a gentle voice broke through the stillness. "Hey there, sweetheart, are you lost?" Emma turned to see a woman in a wheelchair, about 34 years old, rolling toward her. The woman had kind eyes, her hair pulled back neatly, and though her gown was elegant, her expression was warm and approachable. Emma hesitated, hugging her teddy close, but something about the woman made her feel safe. The woman introduced herself softly and extended her hand. Emma, shy but desperate for comfort, stepped closer, her small fingers brushing the woman's palm. Back in the wedding hall, Mark's search grew frantic. His breathing came in short bursts as he pushed through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares. He ran toward the hallway, calling Emma's name again, his voice echoing. His legs felt heavy, his mind clouded with dread, but he didn't stop. Every fatherly instinct in him screamed that he had to find her no matter what. Then, just as he rounded the corner into the corridor, his eyes landed on a sight that nearly brought him to his knees. There, at the far end of the hall, Emma stood beside the woman in the wheelchair. His daughter's little hand rested in the woman's lap, and though she looked nervous, She wasn't crying. Relief flooded him so quickly he had to pause for a moment, his heart hammering as tears threatened to blur his vision. He rushed forward, calling her name again, softer this time. Emma turned and upon seeing him broke into a smile. "Daddy!" she cried, running into his arms. Mark knelt down, scooping her up and hugging her so tightly she squealed. He kissed her head again and again, whispering her name like a prayer. All the tension, fear, and despair poured out of him in that embrace. He held her as if he'd never let go, his chest rising and falling with shaky breaths. Only when he felt Emma safe against him did he look up at the woman in the wheelchair, his eyes filled with gratitude. She smiled gently, nodding as if to say it was no trouble. But for Mark, it was everything. He stepped closer, balancing Emma on his hip, and said, "Thank you. Thank you for keeping her safe." His voice cracked with emotion, drawing the attention of a few nearby guests who had followed him into the hallway. They stood silently, watching the scene unfold, their expressions softening as they realized what had happened. For Mark, the world seemed to stop in that moment. The panic and chaos of the night faded, leaving only relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of connection to the stranger who had helped when he needed it most. He promised himself that he would never forget the kindness of the woman in the wheelchair, or the terrifying reminder of just how fragile his world truly was. The music from the wedding drifted faintly into the hallway as Mark stood there, still holding Emma close. His heart was calming now, but he felt shaken, the kind of fear that leaves an imprint. He couldn't stop glancing at the woman in the wheelchair who had helped his daughter. There was something steady and comforting in the way she carried herself. She had done something extraordinary without even moving from her chair. Mark adjusted Emma on his hip, walked a little closer, and said again, more softly this time, "I can't thank you enough. You don't know what this means to me." The woman tilted her head, her smile gentle, her eyes reflecting understanding rather than pity. Emma, still clutching her teddy, looked between her father and the woman. "She found me, Daddy," she said with a small, proud voice, as if she had discovered treasure. Mark hugged her again, his chest tightening with emotion. "I know, sweetheart, and we're very lucky she did." Turning back to the woman, he asked, "Can I at least know your name? I'd like to thank you properly." She introduced herself as Grace, her voice calm and warm. The name seemed to fit her perfectly, as if her very presence carried that same quiet strength. Grace explained that she had noticed Emma wandering in the corridor and simply stayed with her until help came. "I just didn't want her to feel scared," she said softly. "Kids sense things, you know. Sometimes all they need is someone who won't rush them." Mark nodded, his throat tight. She spoke with a clarity that made him pause, as though she understood more than she let on. Emma had relaxed beside her, leaning slightly against the side of Grace's chair, her fear replaced with curiosity. The guests who had followed into the hallway gradually drifted back toward the main room, realizing everything was all right now. Mark remained, torn between wanting to return to the wedding and wanting to stay in this moment of calm. He realized he didn't want to just walk away from Grace. Something about her steadiness grounded him after such chaos. He crouched so Emma could stand again, keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. "Grace, would you mind if I bought you a drink? Just to say thank you," he asked hesitantly. Grace hesitated, her eyes flickering, but then she nodded politely. "I suppose I could join you for a few minutes," she replied. Together, the three of them moved back toward the reception. Mark kept glancing at her, trying not to make it obvious. Grace didn't seem uncomfortable in the crowd, but people did notice her, some with quick, curious looks. She carried herself with dignity, not shrinking from their glances. Emma, sensing no awkwardness, chatted happily, telling Grace about her teddy bear, the music, and even how much she liked the cake. Grace listened attentively, smiling, as though Emma's little words mattered just as much as anything else happening that evening. They found a quieter corner near the edge of the ballroom. Mark ordered a sparkling water for Grace and a juice for Emma, though his own hands still trembled slightly from the earlier panic. When he handed Grace her glass, he caught the way she looked at him, calm, steady, as though she could see through the layers of exhaustion and worry he usually kept hidden. "You're a good dad," she said suddenly, her voice low. Mark blinked in surprise. "How do you know that?" he asked, almost defensively. Grace just smiled faintly. "Because even in a crowded room, you noticed the second she was gone. Some parents wouldn't have realized for hours. You knew." Her words sank deep, warming him in a way he hadn't expected. He had always worried about whether he was enough for Emma. Raising her alone had been a constant struggle. Long nights, endless responsibility, doubts that he was doing it right. To hear a stranger affirm his effort touched something raw inside him. He cleared his throat, glancing down to hide the emotion in his eyes. "I try," he admitted softly. Grace nodded knowingly, not pressing further. Emma tugged at Grace's hand then, asking if she wanted to see her draw something. Mark pulled a small notepad and pen from his pocket. He always carried one for Emma to doodle on during long events. She happily scribbled beside Grace, showing her messy stars and wobbly hearts. Grace complimented each drawing with sincerity, and Emma glowed with pride. Watching them, Mark felt something stir in him, a sense of connection that went beyond gratitude. The night wore on, the music fading as people began to leave. Mark realized he hadn't spoken this freely with anyone in a long time. Grace shared a little about herself, not much, just enough to hint at resilience. She mentioned she had been in a car accident years ago, which left her unable to walk, but she never said it as if seeking sympathy. Instead, she spoke about the importance of finding strength in unexpected places, and how sometimes helping someone else could give life more meaning than chasing after your own comfort. By the time the reception ended, Mark didn't want the evening to end. He offered to walk Grace out, pushing her chair carefully through the lobby. Emma skipped alongside, chattering about how the night had turned out to be like a storybook. Outside, the cool air brushed against them. Grace's car service was waiting, but before she left, Mark paused, his hand lingering on the back of her chair. "I don't want this to be the last time we see you," he said quietly, almost surprising himself with the honesty. Grace looked up at him, her expression soft but searching. She handed him a small card with her number, saying simply, "Then it doesn't have to be." Emma beamed, hugging Grace tightly before she got into the car. Mark stood there watching as the vehicle pulled away, holding Emma's hand. Something about that night felt life-changing, though he couldn't explain why. The fear of losing his daughter had shaken him, but the presence of Grace had steadied him just as deeply. As they walked home under the city lights, Mark carried a new sense of hope, a belief that sometimes people enter your life exactly when you need them most. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment with Grace wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something far greater than he could have imagined. A bond woven from fear, relief, and the quiet strength of a woman in a wheelchair who had reminded him that kindness still had the power to change everything.